Okay, here we are at Lesson 3, Unit 3. Now we're going to continue on really with that first triad, and specifically we're going to focus on warrants, on the heart and soul of the argument. There are really basically 5 types of warrants, which also means then that there are basically 5 types of arguments. Those are arguments by authority, by analogy, by cause, by sign, and by generalization. What I'm going to do is go through and define each of these for you. I'm going to have you take a break from this to do a exercise, and then we'll come back and see how you did on the exercise. First of all, we'll take a look at argument by authority. Now the generic warrant, in other words the general warrant that's applied in all the arguments, although you could specify it of course for a given argument, is that the source of the data is credible and should be believed. Now, a real sign or a real key for arguments by authority is that there's clearly a citation of a specific source. It's not just a general statement, but it's kind of like an according to phrase. Now, the inherent weakness, in other words, the weakness that you should always consider, is the expertise, authority, and or bias of the source. Are they really experts? Are they really authorities? Or do they have a bias that would naturally distort or lead them to a certain perspective? Now, when we talk about backing the warrant, the term backing, you're going to run into again here in a little bit. It refers to providing additional evidence proving the credibility or authority of the source for the argument by authority specifically, but in general what it means is providing evidence to prove that the warrant is solid. So notice it's evidence for the warrant, not evidence for the claim, evidence for the warrant. So in this argument by authority, if I question your authority, you'd provide additional evidence proving that the source is credible and should be believed. In an argument by analogy, you're arguing that the items being compared share significant similarities. Well, just think about this then. If the significant similarities are the heart of the argument, the inherent weakness is that the significant differences outweigh the similarities. And how would you back the warrant? How would you prove the warrant? Well, you would reinforce how the similarities outweigh the differences. So you have to it's kind of a balancing act. You want to show that the similarities are greater than the differences. I do need to point out that with an argument by analogy, there really are 3 types. There's literal, figurative, and historical. A literal analogy is comparing 2 items which are overall very similar to each other. Think of it as comparing apples and apples. A figurative is when you're comparing 2 items that are different superficially but are similar thematically. So if you're comparing apples and oranges, yes, they are different, but they're also they're all fruits. They're all fruits that we enjoy eating. I mean, there's all sorts of ways that they are actually similar too. Historical then would be comparing a present situation to a past similar event. So for example, you make an apple pie at home and you're eating it, and you say it's not as good as Grandma used to make. So in a sense, you're comparing something from the present to the past. In an argument by cause, the generic warrant is the data and claim are cause and effect, so that there's a cause-effect relationship between the data and the claim. Now, if the strength of the argument is the cause-effect relationship, that means the inherent weakness is how strong is that relationship. Now notice on your screen this phrase, post hoc ergo propter hoc. It's Latin, basically means after this, therefore because of this, and you're going to get this again when we get into argument fallacies. Post hoc ergo propter hoc just means that it's an argument fallacy in which the causal link is either not present or it just hasn't been proven. So the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy is the inherent weakness of an argument by cause. Then to back this warrant, to back this causal relationship, you'd have to provide additional evidence proving the causal connection, proving that there is a cause-effect relationship between the data and the claim. Now, arguments by sign can be sometimes one of the trickier ones to identify. Often they look like arguments by cause. Okay, the generic warrant, the data identifies conditions which usually, now notice that word, usually indicate the presence of the claim. It's not as absolute as cause-effect. Rather, it identifies conditions in which the claim is often present. The inherent weakness, then, is the probability that the signs are indicative of the claim. Okay, and you would back the warrant by providing additional evidence proving the common occurrence of the signs in the claim. We'll see some examples of this here in just a little bit. Okay, argument by generalization. Very common argument that we use. The generic warrant is what is true of the whole is true of the specific. Think about stereotypes. Even though stereotypes can be bad, they are a good example of argument by generalization. If I have a stereotype about students, that all students are lazy, I don't think that. But if I were to, then if I see a student, I would assume they're lazy. Well, that's because I'm assuming that what's true of the whole is true of the specific. Now notice that generalization, that stereotype is not true in its objective sense, but it's a matter of what kind of generalization am I applying to this. The inherent weakness, then, is the generalization true in all situations. This is one of the reasons that arguments by generalization can be very difficult to back, because you'd have to provide additional evidence that the generalization is true of all situations. And if you find exceptions, that inherently is going to weaken that argument. Alright, here's what I want you to do. Stop the slideshow. Take out those exercises from the previous lesson where I had you identify claim, data, and warrant. And then for each of those warrants, identify what type of argument it is, then come back to this presentation and move on for a discussion of the answers.